Well, welcome. Today the topic is Psalm 22, his final thoughts. And we live in a culture that doesn't want to look old, much less think about dying someday. And psychologists suggest that a large part of human behavior is influenced by the unconscious fear of death. Paul addressed this dark human trait 2,000 years ago when he summed up Jesus' final thought process. And here's a verse here. It says, "And also that he might deliver and completely set free all those who through the haunting fear of death were held in bondage throughout the whole course of their lives." That's Hebrews 2:15 from the AMPC. It's a haunting fear that keeps people in bondage or slavery their entire lives. So in a nutshell, Jesus' final thoughts before he died were about how he could help us conquer our fear of death and be released from the bondage that restricts our very existence. And we're all going to be faced with the unpleasant thought of death at some point. And what we do with those thoughts will determine our true freedom. To help us deal with these unwelcome feelings, let's peer into the heart, the mind, the soul of the Messiah during his time of incredible pain, heartless humiliation, knowing full well he would ultimately achieve victory. So we're going to now see how Psalm 22 shows us how Jesus saw his life flash before his eyes long before he was ever staked to that post. God clearly showed him the amazing highlights of his life via a song written about him by David 1,000 years before he was born. And this song encapsulates Jesus' final thoughts. The thought-provoking thought progression of this song is going to help us get through our hard times as well. His final thoughts can help us finally live. So here's a prelude to Psalm 22. Now, for many hours, Jesus had been beaten within an inch of his life at the hands of the Roman soldiers. And these men were experts in the art of interrogation and torture. And because Jesus had been convicted of a capital crime, the soldiers no longer thought of him as a human being. He was just an animal that they could do anything they wanted to, just on his way to the slaughter. And Jesus was covered with blood from savage lashings. He was crimson red from head to toe. He didn't look like a human anymore. He was bleeding inside and out, and he was dragged to a very public spot. He was stripped totally naked, and then he was nailed to this post along with four bad guys who were going to get the same treatment. And it was on a main road for everybody to see, and there were thousands of people coming and going past this way, in and out of Jerusalem, because it was the feast of the Passover. And Jesus was dehydrated from loss of blood. He was hanging there fully naked in the elements for about 6 hours. Thick clouds and wind, they rolled in, and it became ominously cloudy and cool outside. Crowds surrounded him. Passerbyers scolded him, yelled at him, mocked him, and they made faces at him and said horrible things, unspeakable things. Even 3 of the 4 others that were crucified with him, they turned on him verbally just like everybody else. If you remember what I taught last week, I mean, all of Israel was primed to hate him and to turn on him. Even his family had for a while. And so now this is the culmination of all this horrible thought process. Now, Jesus wasn't crucified way up in the air on some fancy hand-carved cross, but he was staked to what was probably a reusable post with reusable bronze nails. And the Romans were efficient, if nothing else. So the post would have been just long enough to suspend a person his size and then plunk him into a hole, shoving rocks in around it to hold it upright with him attached to it. And he was probably just a little higher than eye level with the people who walked by. And this is how the Romans like to do this crucifixion thing. It was for intimidation. You do what we say or else. And his mom was there. His aunt was there. You know, Mary Magdalene was there, among many others. And what Jesus had told them that was going to happen to him over the past year was happening quickly and violently. And his apostles were hiding in the shadows, unsure of their own fate. Wouldn't you have? We'd like to think we would have done things differently. Here's a little more background. This astounding text today is going to come from Psalm 22. And this is not quoted in entirety in the Gospels, but everyone knew when and where to sing a particular psalm. And this was a place that this one was sung or said. And just like you may find the exact right song to fit with your mood, you ever done that? The Judeans would sing the exact right song for their situation. They sang through their problems. Maybe you do too. And Matthew and Mark mention the first verse of Psalm 22, and John mentions the final phrase of that song. Matthew and Mark set the time at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Remember, he was pinned up there, about 9? So it's about 6 hours he was hanging there. And this is when Jesus said this Psalm 22, his last song. And Luke speaks of Jesus' future plans. Matthew 27:50, don't turn there, but it mentions the volume with which he spoke. But people couldn't really understand him because his face had been so beaten. I don't know if you've ever been hit in the head real bad, or your lips, and you don't sound right, or you went to the dentist, and you feel like your lips sticking way out. Well, I mean, he was beat. He was beat beyond recognition. So what he said, some people didn't know. They didn't know what he was saying. But he said it anyway. And it says in that verse, Matthew 27:50, it says, Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, he yielded up the ghost. And this loud voice, it doesn't say how many words. It may have just gone without saying. Everybody might have known what he would have done then. But it's this knowledge that had been lost. And this isn't new stuff. I mean, I thought I was the first one to ever figure this out a 3 years ago. And then I realized that everybody seemed to know it but me about Psalm 22, but they won't ever teach it because it doesn't fit with their Easter theme. And they make it a footnote in most Bibles. And so the word loud in there is a Greek word megas, and it means loud or mighty or great. Jesus literally boomed out his final words. He finished strong. So many of the things that happened throughout Jesus' life and what happened on the day of his crucifixion were seen in detail by David 1,000 years prior by revelation. And this psalm doesn't just talk about the crucifixion, it talks about the highlights of his life. And you're going to get a glimpse of how clearly God can unveil the future for you. He can help us see what we need to see just as clearly as David and Jesus saw, if you just really want to know. Most people are so tied to fear, and fear is all tied to death, that they just don't want to take that step. And the same mindset of hope is going to help us through our toughest of times, even as we struggle with the harbinger of impending death, because we all are. You're always too young to die. I don't care how old somebody is. Let's go to Psalm 22 now, and we're going to see how Jesus took his mind from suffering to glory. And this will also teach us how to do something similar. Okay. So Psalm 22, his sufferings. And we're going to, verses 1 through 21 discusses his life and sufferings. And verses 22 through 31 tell of his glory, his amazing final victory. And so Psalm 22, verse 1, to the chief musician upon Ijeleth Shahar, a psalm of David. Now some researchers say this tribute should have been in the previous psalm, Psalm 21, and others say it belongs here. I don't know, but if this Ijeleth Shahar is supposed to be here, it sets the tempo of a song. And what those words mean, it's a deer at daybreak. And if you've ever been hunting or something, or been out and you see a deer, it's alert, right? It's looking. I mean, right when the sun's coming up, it's getting its last meal before it goes to lay down. So it's very wary, nervous, looking around. It's up tempo. So if this is supposed to be in Psalm 22, then it was an up tempo song. And imagine that heartbeat and that pace that young deer might have. So I'm not sure. So now we're going to address the problem, which is step one. As we read Psalm 22, watch the progression of human thought. And we're going to go from dark introspection to brilliance, from being under attack to enjoying our ultimate victory. And the reason I say us is because you're going to see you're in this psalm too. And David even saw you. It's pretty crazy. You'll see what I'm talking about. And here we are, the rest of verse 1. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Now notice how this amazing stanza sounds familiar to what Jesus said moments before he died. Remember Matthew 27:46, where it says about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice and said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now I know some of us have been taught a complicated adaptation of these Aramaic words. But let's just read what the word actually says. And you may have a different opinion. I understand they tried to make it better because nobody wants to think of Jesus being forsaken by God or even saying that. But if you think of it as a song, and this song takes from the depth of despair all the way to ultimate and total victory way in the future, then you understand, because this is what all humans go through. When you get hit hard, it's like, why me? Where are you, God? This roaring, it's like a heavy moan. Jesus was in real agony. I mean, what would it feel like to have been beaten for all those hours, to not even look like a human, to have the skin peeled off of you, to be hanging there naked in front of all your friends and people you don't know. Your hands, pierced through and your feet pierced through. It had to be horrendous. David saw it. I'll prove that in a second. David saw this 1,000 years before. He heard it, we're going to see, and he may have even felt it. But he was inside the head of Jesus Christ in this song, and you'll see it. And David experienced this by revelation. Verse 2, Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not. And in the night season, I'm not silent. See, people are tempted to wonder if God is listening. And we've all felt like that at times. We all wonder if God even hears our prayers. Jesus Christ went through this same thought process. Every human does. But it's where you take it after that. Remember when it said he was tempted in all points like as we are, except he didn't give in to blaming God for his problems or blaming God for not being there. Jesus was a master at moving through his troubles and knowing full well that there's always light at the end of the tunnel, even if that light is going to come in the future. It's still light. And there's got to be deliverance. There will be deliverance for all of us. There has to be hope, or there's no reason to believe. There's no reason to live. So we first have to address the problem. My problem is, do I really believe this God stuff? Is God really here? Then we think, if they can do it, I can do it. And that's the next step. If someone else can get through this problem, then maybe we can too. First we think, why me? Where are you, God? And then it's like, okay, if somebody else has gone through something like this, so can I. And first we address the problem, and then we recall the precedent. I'm in pain, I hurt. Others have been through a lot of pain. They've been through similar things maybe, and if they can do it, I can do it. Watch this, verse 3. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praise of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, they were delivered. They trusted in thee and were not confounded. See how he's moving past the opening phrase that mentioned he felt forsaken. Now he's moving into a different level here. But we're going to see him go back and forth like most humans do. You know, God, you're at the center of praise of all Israel. My forefathers called out to you and you delivered them each and every time. Will you do the same for me? So now we take personal inventory of our thoughts. And now this song helps us see how we can process pain, process hatred from people who are close to us, and from vicious attacks. Verse 6. But I am a worm, and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. Now this doesn't mean a worm like we think of a worm. It's a very poor translation. This word worm in the Hebrew means crimson beetle, red beetle. And this species of beetle would climb up a tree and literally attach themselves, give birth, and then they would burst and this red dye would come out. And once it dies, it releases a crimson fluid that literally stains the wood. And this insect is even today harvested and used to dye fabrics red. And David literally saw the red and bloodied body of Jesus Christ attached to a tree, which reminded him of the common crimson beetle. Imagine. Imagine what he saw. Now, how do we withstand a verbal attack? And remember, this is a song about what David saw and heard by revelation from Jesus Christ's perspective. Verse 7, and all they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, he trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. Matthew 27:39 says, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads. 1,000 years later, it happened. And verse 43 says, not of Psalm, but of Matthew 27, it says, it even tells that some in front of Jesus Christ said, he trusted in God, let him deliver him now. David heard, he saw the crowd and he heard this stuff. Imagine. David saw and heard this 1,000 years before Jesus Christ was crucified. David saw a vivid, live audio and video feed from the eyes and ears of the future Christ. Talk about getting in someone's head. Talk about getting in someone's head. Imagine feeling what he felt, seeing what he saw, hearing what he heard. This helped Jesus prepare himself to take it on, to delight in God. because he knew this. He'd memorized this. This was sung. And I'll tell you when this is sung in a few more minutes. It's still sung today in the Jewish religion at one time a year. And now, I was thinking now, remember love and remember God. And verse 9, but thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. See, David saw Jesus relive his earliest memories of his mother's love for him. And you know how a newborn baby is usually handed to the mother and set right on her belly, even still connected to the umbilical cord. The mind picture here is he was handed to God at that moment. You know, he saw his birth and Jesus' parents' all-out commitment to raise him as the Christ. How much he saw, we'll never know. Verse 11, be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. In other words, God, I'm glad you're close by. You're the only one who can help me get through this. Verse 12, many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. See, the bulls of Bashan were wild, free-ranging bulls from the east side of the Jordan River. And David and Jesus would both have seen these things in the morning coming and drinking water from the Jordan River. But they were wild bulls. And a wild bull's different than a tame one. Wild means wild. Wild resists restraints. Wild doesn't play well with people. A truly wild animal can never be tamed. It can be controlled through punishment or harnesses or food, but it can never be tamed. Like a horse can be tamed, but its relative, the zebra, never has been. They've never been tamed. They've been controlled, but they can't be tamed. The word strong in that verse, that strong bull, is at times in the Old Testament used in reference to angels or spirit beings. So what David is seeing here is more than just wild and powerful herbivores. But it could mean to him, he was surrounded by a herd of wild men who were manipulated by strong devil spirits that don't play well with people who love the light. And the reason I say this is during the days of Moses, this not long before David, there was a king in the area of Bashan, and his name was Og, O-G. And he was a giant of a man. And in many ways, he was a giant. And his bed was described as being 9 cubits long, which is about 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. So this is a big guy. This is a big guy. Usually you don't make a bed that much bigger than you. And it takes a big man to fill a 13-foot long bed. A cubit is from your elbow to the tip of your finger. It's about 21 inches, something like that, 18 to 20 inches. Now, Goliath was only 6.5 cubits tall, and that's about 10 feet. So this guy was bigger than Goliath. And Goliath is from that area, by the way, just so you know. Might have been his grandpappy. Grandpappy Og. Not only a big man, but he was evil. He was as big with evil. He hated God and God's people as much as anybody on earth ever had. And, so evil is what the wild bulls of Bashan represented to David and represented to the Christ. And this isn't Now, this isn't necessarily talking about the size of a man. It's really talking about the size of their demonic influence on society. A king of evil, a titan, a sultan of evil. You know, like the people Noah had to battle for decades and a century, you know, for many years while building the ark. It said every imagination of their heart was only evil continually. They were just totally wicked people. That's what Noah had to deal with. That's what Og was. And so that's the mind picture here. And now, who around Jesus might have filled this description of somebody who just hated him and hated the light that he was and the love with which he was teaching? Sadly, the meanest and most evil people on earth are religious people. Doesn't make sense, but it's always been and always will be. And it's important to acknowledge that the hurt. We have to acknowledge our hurt and to recognize who's really behind the attack. So this is the process he's going through. I'm hurt. Where are you, God? Okay, I know you've helped all these people. You know, now I got people doing all these bad things to me. You know, you know, so, but I do realize where this attack's coming from, ultimately. And we all know that too. Verse 13, they gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and roaring lion. And you've all seen lions just tear the prey to pieces on your PBS or History Channel or something. You know, these wild adventure shows. And so that's a mind picture. And then to gape is to bite. Now, Jesus really didn't get bit by people, but he got bit by their words. And I guarantee you've been hurt more with people's words than you ever have by them physically. So did Jesus Christ. A ravening lion is a lion in the midst of a feeding frenzy. It's just tearing into it, just ramming its head into that thing. See, remember how these religious leaders couldn't wait to kill Jesus? Remember how, like last week we talked about, they tried to kill him in his own hometown right when he started his ministry. They wanted to throw him over a cliff head first so his head would splatter. I mean, imagine a year of having attacks and threats like that. And these religious leaders couldn't wait to kill him. And it was a killing frenzy, a feeding frenzy, once they finally got him staked up there. And they're the ones manipulating a lot of this conversation. Those are the wild bulls of Bashan. These were men born of the seed of the serpent. That's how David saw things. Just tearing chunks off their victim. You know, and David must have seen the floggings of Jesus too. You know, crazy. It's amazing how verse 13 jumps from wild herbivore to wild carnivore. Both are dangerous. And remember, this is a song that was memorized to take you from point A to point Z. You know, David felt the thinking process of Jesus Christ while Jesus was hanging on that tree. He was in his head. This is how Jesus' mind worked. You think this stuff helped David through his, you know, he had people trying to kill him. The king of Israel was trying to kill him for a while. 14, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It's melted in the midst of my bowels. And this is how Jesus Christ was feeling. He had to understand what was happening to him spiritually if he was ever going to be able to get out of that dark hole. Melted like wax. You know, I'm totally drained and in pain. My bones have been pulled out of the joints. Doesn't say that in the New Testament, but it says it here. That's why he couldn't carry that thing when they wanted him to. Probably couldn't walk. If you pulled your joints out, what did they do to him, the Roman soldiers? It's horrendous. Imagine the pain of your joints being pulled from their sockets. I've never had a dislocated shoulder, but I know people who have, and it's horrible pain. Or a hip dislocated. Verse 15, my strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. I'm so dry that my tongue sticks to my mouth. I'm right at the verge of death. John 19:28 says that Jesus was thirsty. Remember that verse? David could feel how thirsty Jesus was. God showed that to David. It's wild. Now he gets attacked by a whole different level of evil people. Verse 16, for dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. This word dogs, see, dogs aren't typically wild. And feral dogs are dogs that have been abandoned by their humans, and now they gather together and they run in packs. And they can be quite violent. And they can usually be domesticated in one generation. If you took a puppy of a feral dog and raise it in your house, it's going to be like any other dog. But something turns these things feral. Something pushed them out of the pack and made them run like a pack of dogs. See, but a wild animal like those bulls of Bashan, they can never, or that lion, they can't be domesticated. Can't be. You can control them, but can't be domesticated. See, these are people who aren't inherently evil by nature, but they've allowed themselves to be manipulated by the wild people born of the seed of the serpent. That's a dog. It's somebody who allows themselves to be manipulated to the point they try to take down people who move the light, who walk in love. Now, David and Jesus were well aware of what really happens behind the scenes, and we need to be aware of it too. We have to be aware of it too. People don't like to think about this stuff, but we'll never make it to our hope, to our ultimate victory, if we don't see what's really going on. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's our battle, folks. And if people are doing it, it's because they're manipulated. They're either a dog or they're a wild bull. Figuratively speaking. See, David saw, David heard, and possibly felt the pain of crucifixion. On a side note, David actually saw by revelation exactly what a fully armed Roman soldier looked like. There was no Roman soldiers 1,000 years BC. To him, they might have looked like dogs. Different culture, different look. Who knows? Remember the first time you saw somebody from a totally different race? It might have been shocking to you. It would have been interesting for David, the warrior that he was, to see what modern warriors wore. Because remember, Roman soldiers always had to wear their gear. The Romans didn't occupy Israel until 69 BC. Just under 1,000 years after that. Verse 17, I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. Jesus could literally see some of his own exposed bones, where the flesh had been ripped away by those whips that had bone or metal, tied into the ends of them. That was a normal way that they whipped people in those days. Probably his ribs were showing, or maybe on his arm or something where they just repeatedly hit. Imagine seeing your own bones. David saw Jesus' bones. 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. What is he seeing there? Remember that from, that's in the Gospels. It's an exact account that happened a millennia after that. David saw the lowly Roman soldiers gambling for Jesus' clothes that they had stripped off of him. Isn't that crazy? David saw that. And he wrote this song about that stuff. Now we have to ask God for help. And at first we're shocked and we wonder, why me? Then we realize that the attack was not because God allowed it, but because we have a vicious and deadly enemy that hates it if we move love, move light, move truth. And at first we reflect inwardly, but now we fully need to turn our mind back to God for help. Verse 19, be not thou far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me? Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. He's not calling God darling, like, oh, darling. You know, darling is another poor translation. It means my one and only. He goes, save me, my one and only God. You're my one and only. You're my last chance. And notice the transition here from the words forsaken me in verse 1, now to my one and only God. Does that sound like a forsaking? No, this is the progression of thinking in this song. From despair to victory. Isn't it so human? He knows God didn't forsake him. This is part of that hymn, part of that psalm. You know, we take ourselves from the depth of despair to victory. And this song is building to a crescendo that'll blow your mind. Verse 21, save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Okay, we just went mystical here. You know, now this isn't that magical unicorn that walks on rainbows and has its tail brushed by little girls. You know, this isn't a unicorn like that. The word unicorn is the same word as wild bull. I don't know why they translated it like that, but they did. And the horn of these wild, so that's these wild bulls, and these bulls have horns. Now, to be heard from the horn of a wild ox would be a trumpet made from its horn. You've seen them before. Maybe when you were a kid, or like if you studied at the shofar, remember that? That the Judeans blow those things? That's a horn. That's a horn of a ram, not a bull. And it's fashioned from a bull or some animal, horned animal, and it's used for maybe a call to battle or a warning or something. And here's a fun fact. Did you know that Psalm 22 is quoted or sung in part during the Jewish New Year celebration called Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Tishri 1, even today? And this is when they blow the shofars and those hollowed out ram horns. And some people say that Tishri 1 was the day that Jesus was born. So it's pretty crazy stuff here. You know, how a lot of this stuff sort of ties and links. And this finishes up the first part of Psalm 22. The attention given to his suffering now is going to end. And now we take on a new mindset. We've gotten past the hurt. We realize where the attack's coming from. We know who's going to help us. And now our mind is totally set on ultimate and utter victory. Psalm 22, now it's his amazing glory, or moving past the negatives. And it's good to say out loud what we know is right and true and loving and light. And it's time to put aside the negatives of the past and move on to higher ground. See Psalm 22:22, it says, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation I will praise thee. He sees himself getting up, getting delivered from this present situation. Remember Jonah in the belly of that fish? He goes, I'm going to praise you again someday. You know, and he got up 3 days later. Jesus knows he's going to get up 3 days later. David knows Jesus is going to get up. Imagine just knowing that everything was going to be okay if not in this life, in doesn't that help? In the next, I didn't say. You see, and he sees himself getting up, getting delivered from this present situation. Verse 23, ye that fear the Lord, praise him. All ye the seed of Jacob, glorify him. And ye that fear him, all ye the seed of Israel. For he hath not despised, nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. Neither hath he hid his face from him. But when he cried unto him, he heard. Here it clearly shows mature thinking. He shows that even in the bleakest of situations, he's not forgotten. Never forgotten. God can't forget you. God is present for you. Now he thinks way ahead. This is the hope. My praise of thee in the great congregation. My praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. See, the great congregation is thousands of years in the future. Even our future. After everyone is risen up and the devil and his wild bulls have tasted their second death, David saw deep into that future. The great congregation. Those are all the people that'll be alive forever when we live in that new paradise where there will never be a devil or anything to cause so much hell that we have to live with on this earth. Now, this is a long way from being forsaken in verse 1, isn't it? I wonder if while Jesus was singing this song, if others joined in. Would have been common. His mom taught him that song. She was right there. As well as other people who loved him, off and on were standing next to him during those 6 hours. This was right at the end, though. Now, there's always hope. And we all will be healed. We will be made perfect. And we will all be together someday with the people who love us. Verse 26, the meek shall eat and be satisfied, and they shall praise the Lord that seek him. Your heart shall live forever. All the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord, and all the kindreds of the nation shall worship before thee. This is the future paradise again Jesus spoke of to that one malefactor. If you studied it, you know what I'm talking about. David may have even seen and heard that exchange. Who knows? The clearer you see your hope, your future, the easier it's going to be to handle your present situation. The clearer you see your hope, your future, the easier it's going to be to handle the stuff you're going through right now. Verse 28, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. See, the devil will no longer at that time be able to manipulate people born of the seed of the serpent, those wild bulls and lions who turn and manipulate the feral dogs of this earth, of which there are many, who in turn make our lives miserable. The devil's going to be gone someday, folks. David saw it. Jesus knew it. And we need that hope too. Because your life may not turn out exactly like you dreamed. It may. We've all had enough bad stuff happen that we wish it hadn't. Verse 29, and all they that be fat upon earth shall eat and worship, and all they that go down to the dust shall bow before him, and none can keep alive his own soul. See, we're going to eat and worship and eat and worship. And we're going to have all the time in the world to truly enjoy our life together. If you're not really digging it right now, I guarantee you're going to love it in eternity. And worship doesn't mean like a religious worship like you think. Worship is a lifestyle. It's just going to be the greatest. It's going to be positive. You're going to give the glory to God by your actions and by having fun and by eating, apparently. Eat and worship. So you know there's the two things you're going to do in eternity, right? You know? And God had to show him that what his life was going to be like in the future, or he couldn't have kept his head together. What an amazing God we have. There's so much in the Bible that shows us our future. Let's learn that. Let's hang on to those things. Jesus needed to clearly see into his future so that he could handle his now. David saw it. We need to see it. Verse 30, a seed shall serve him. It shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. See, David caught a glimpse of a different group of people, a different style of believer than he was used to. He saw these in this eternity that he viewed. And they looked different. They acted different. They had unique duties. Wonder who they might have been. I think they're you. I think you're that seed. You know, what an amazing revelation David had. Could those self-same images keep us going through some tough times? Yeah. You know, if they can keep the Christ focused, they can keep us focused until we achieve ultimate victory. Verse 31, they shall come, and they shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born that he hath done this. Remember Jesus mentioned the new birth to Nicodemus in John 3, early in his ministry? David and Jesus saw you and I in the future. That's mind-blowing, folks. You think David could live on that kind of revelation for a little while? How do you think he did the things he did? Oh my word. This is an amazing song from Christ's perspective. This end of life flashback and flash forward ends with a tribute to our future. To our future. You're special, folks. You're so special that you're written right into the mind and heart of the Son of God. He thought about you on his last thoughts as he was belting out this song. You're important. You're necessary. You're worthy, both now and throughout all eternity, no matter what that person told you. What a hope. What a hope. What a vision. What a song. Today we saw what Jesus thought about during those 6 hours that he was being crucified. We saw his progression of thinking and his absolute belief in both his future and our future. And to me, that is flat out amazing. And to know that David saw the same thing through the eyes of the Christ. Holy moly. Didn't this song, this Psalm 22, help us peer into Jesus' heart? Makes me know him a little more. Life wasn't just all about him and his troubles. It was all about you in the future. He did this who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God. It's our hope too, folks. David saw it. David heard it. David felt it. The more you can understand this and feel this stuff, the easier it's going to be to get through your toughest of days. The closing statement of this psalm is so mind-blowing, I need to read it again. Verse 31, they shall come and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born that he hath done this. Now the words he hath done this can be translated, it is finished. It was done. He did everything he needed to do so that we can do everything we need to do. He did everything he needed to do so that we could have everything we need to have. He did everything he needed to do so that we could be with him forever and ever and ever. See, his life is far from over, and so is yours. I don't care what your age or situation is, your life is far from over. It's forever's a long time, folks. Just before Jesus dies, he loudly blurts out the final verse of Psalm 22 and his final statement in John 19. He took that thought process from suffering to glory, from misery to majesty. No longer are we slaves to this world because of our unconscious fear of death. No. We're super conquerors because we elevate our thinking to take us from helplessness to hope. Jesus ended his life with a victory song so strong and so bold that we too can achieve this victory. His final thoughts for him and his final thoughts for us is, it is finished. God bless.